Hello and welcome to This Really Happened, a place where unbelievable, heart-touching true stories come to life. Sometimes surprising, sometimes bittersweet, always real. Grab a drink and settle in. We're about to begin. When would this frantic race of life finally quiet down? Jane loved the unhurried, measured pace of days with all her soul. She didn't rush headlong to work like many others, but left well in advance, choosing not the shortest route, but the most picturesque one, past the ponds, where impudent ducks, ready to accept treats, darted among the water lilies. She soaked in the sight of the smooth water, the boundless sky, bright flowers, and the cats she met along the way. And a couple of times she even allowed herself to be late. Her friend Rita, with good-natured mockery she didn't hide, would say, "You're like something out of the last century, Janet. You should have been a lady of the 18th century. You'd stroll with a fan, embroider on velvet with pearls, and if your dowry was rich, no worries at all." Honestly, I wouldn't refuse that, Jane confessed. And now, paradoxically, she was about to enter into an inheritance. Her grandmother, a city woman, her father's mother, who had outlived her son by a whole decade, had passed away. Jane felt awkward because she didn't feel grief, and she confided this to Rita. Her friend just waved it off. "Oh, come on, you're too hard on yourself. You barely knew this grandmother anyway. Now, I had a real grandmother, a country one. All it took was asking her to sit with me, and she'd come even by a passing truck, and with pies from the oven too. There was so much love in her. How could I not mourn her passing? But your Eleanor barely interacted with you. You see, she didn't think her daughter-in-law was suitable." "Rita, about those who have passed, either speak well or nothing," Jane reminded her. "That wisdom fully says, about the dead, either speak well or nothing, except the truth." "You can check if you don't believe me," Rita advised. "As for you getting to know and love her, she apparently didn't care about that herself. She didn't have that need. It's good she at least left a will in your name. For that, she deserves respect. After all, your father has some distant nephews, you mentioned. Your Ellie could have left everything to spite them, but she acted humanely. So rejoice in your luck and remember your deceased granny with a kind word. I'd wish everyone to live so long and prosperously." "You're right, Rita," Jane agreed. "Rejoicing in an inheritance doesn't mean rejoicing in Grandmother Eleanor's death." Eugenia, Jane's mother, called her mother-in-law the Queen of Spades. There was no malicious irony or offence in this, just a hint of respect. Eleanor was indeed a lady of that sort. Perhaps it was just a role skillfully played, but she took that secret with her. Living to 90, she had been married several times, increasing her fortune and useful connections with each new husband. From her first marriage, she had a son, Jane's father. "I didn't want children. You were an accident," she confessed to her son without a trace of embarrassment, having once decided on motherhood. As one of the distant relatives recounted at the memorial service, a week before her passing, Ellie was still calling masters for manicures and pedicures. Jane was slightly taken aback by this topic at such a moment, but Eugenia noted that her mother-in-law herself would have understood perfectly and wouldn't have been offended. Rather, a satisfied smirk would have appeared on her inscrutable face. Returning home in a third-class carriage after the funeral, Jane asked her mother, "Mom, how did you manage not to feel aversion towards grandmother?" "I understand rationally that I shouldn't attach importance to my mother-in-law's words, but sometimes I just hate her." "Janie, you just live too close and see each other too often." Her mother smiled tiredly. "Patricia is a decent woman, but she doesn't have a life of her own, so she tries to interfere in yours. And what do I have to be offended about with my mother-in-law? I'm grateful to Eleanor that she never meddled in my life with your father, never tried to break us up, although most of my friends were sure she would do exactly that. They thought since I was from a funny province, she would constantly remind him of it. They scared me terribly back then. But nothing of the sort happened. Eleanor was too absorbed in herself and her life to waste time on me. An egoistic mother-in-law living for herself, that's sometimes really great. So I can honestly tell everyone, my mother-in-law was very good indeed, and for leaving the inheritance to her granddaughter, I respect her even more now. Not a petty lady, and honest. She didn't maintain relationships for appearances, but she acknowledged you. I think she actually even liked you. Jane hadn't seen Grandmother Eleanor often, maybe 5 or 6 times in her life, and hadn't noticed that she particularly liked her. No grandmothers needed, Eleanor had said to her 7-year-old granddaughter at their first meeting. Just call me Eleanor, like everyone else. And Jane called her like everyone else, but using the formal address. Madame Eleanor didn't object to that. Are you going to tell Robert, your mother-in-law, that Eleanor left you an inheritance? Eugenia asked with undisguised pleasure, sipping strong tea from a glass in a holder as if it were an exquisite cocktail in an expensive bar. Her mother had once confessed, laughing shyly, that she had loved drinking tea on trains since childhood. It always seemed to taste better that way. I won't say anything yet, Jane shared her thoughts. The will is sealed. No one knows its contents. Maybe there's just some symbolic item with meaning. I wasn't expecting anything at all anyway, so I'll accept any surprise with understanding. But my mother-in-law will definitely get another reason to be displeased with me then. Suddenly, I'll turn out to be not only an inattentive wife and an irresponsible mother, but also an unloved, unlucky granddaughter. Mother and daughter chuckled quietly, understanding each other without words. All right indeed, no need to rush, her mother agreed. What's ours won't leave us, and we don't need what's not ours. And they agreed not to bring up the subject until the will was read. But 2 days before the date set by the notary for the reading, Jane's son, Leo, ended up in the hospital with severe poisoning. His mother-in-law immediately started shouting that the cause was substandard treats at a children's birthday party Leo had been invited to. And of course, if Jane were a truly good mother, she would monitor the families of the children her son associated with. Jane found it amusing to even imagine a 10-year-old having a dangerous social circle, but her mother-in-law nodded seriously, just to avoid useless arguments. The birthday boy was Leo's good friend and classmate, Arthur. If Arthur's mother, who was raising him alone, bought a cake at a big discount, it didn't mean she was to blame for the cake sold in the store being expired. But whatever the case, Leo was in the hospital, out of danger, and starting to get bored. And Jane was supposed to go to the notary for the will reading. Robert, as usual, grumbled something about her job being terribly inconvenient for a married woman, but agreed to stop by and visit his son. Jane woke up very early that morning, and while the coffee slowly brewed on the stove, she twirled her train ticket in her hands and felt sad that she wouldn't be able to visit Leo in the hospital. Of course, she understood rationally. Tomorrow, instead of Mom, Dad would stop by. But it was still sad. Life flies by so quickly. Soon Leo would stop being a child, would be able to manage perfectly without his mother, wouldn't miss her so much, and she wouldn't even have time to remember his childhood, either work or all sorts of stupid, urgent matters. Jane's sad reflections were interrupted by a phone call. Jane Maxwell, I apologize for the unpleasant news, the notary apologized. As I explained to you, for the reading of a sealed will, at least 2 witnesses are needed, but one of them is currently ill. Nothing serious happened to him? Jane asked. Because my son is also in the hospital, poisoned. My condolences. May he recover quickly, the notary replied politely. There's nothing dangerous with the witness, just a fever. But in this heat, he's elderly, worried about his health, and asks to postpone the reading date. He suggested moving the event exactly 1 week from now, if that suits you. Yes, I'll arrange it at work, Jane agreed, not liking to be capricious or disrupt others' plans without reason. And today I'd better spend time with my son anyway, so it's all fine. Please convey my wishes for a speedy recovery to the witness. She truly didn't care about the trip for some phantom inheritance while her son was in the hospital. He hadn't yet crossed that invisible threshold where the possibility of getting money becomes an excuse for leaving a loved one bored and alone. Jane breathed a sigh of relief, drank a second cup of coffee with milk foam, and went to visit Leo, surprising him. If her little son still felt any pain, it would surely disappear after their meeting. The hospital elevator for visitors wasn't working, and Jane didn't understand how to call the side one used for transporting patients on gurneys. She generally felt extremely anxious and uncomfortable in hospitals, and considered herself one of those who could never become a medic. Jane decided to go up to the required 3rd floor by the stairs, on foot. On the windows between the 1st and 2nd floors, she was met by gloomy, wilted roses. Hearing voices, she stopped for some reason, instead of going faster. The voices came from the windows between the 2nd and 3rd floors. Her husband Robert and his mother, Patricia Ann, were talking. Hearing the very first words, Jane froze under the stairwell and mentally thanked herself for choosing silent sneakers for this trip. Robert, I wouldn't wish you any harm, his mother-in-law persuaded him quietly, but persistently. I will always be on your side, whatever you decide. But now I'm asking you to take a break and not rush. Don't you guess why? Mum, why do you love talking in riddles? Robert was lazily annoyed. What am I supposed to guess? That your wife might now be among the heirs after her Moscow grandmother's death. Did you really not think about that? How did you even live to be 40, huh? Mom, don't start. You've chosen a brilliant time and place. We're actually visiting my son and your grandson in the hospital. Exactly, his mother-in-law triumphantly picked up. Don't forget that you and Jane have a son. I'm a living person too. I understand everything perfectly, love-struck and all that. And you know perfectly well that I don't see it as a red rag that you have a child. Leo has a right to a father until he comes of age, and to a share of your property. And then you marry this Sandra of yours, the initial excitement will pass, and what will happen? It will turn out that she's annoyed by these alimony payments and gifts to the child, and she'll want her own child anyway. And you still have to raise Leo, and all this on your one salary. Listen, Sandra doesn't want children. She just wants to live with me without this silly game of hide and seek. A woman who doesn't want children is also suspicious. Either your beauty Sandy is a complete egoist, or she's lying to you so as not to scare you away. You're our oracle, aren't you? Robert snorted. You know everything about everyone. You've laid it all out neatly. Yes, I've lived longer, and I know, his mother-in-law retorted with her favourite phrase, which Jane had heard from her many times and always wanted to argue with, but her own family peace was more precious. Listen to your mother at least once in your life. I know old women like your Jane's grandmother was, all huffy and puffy, but essentially just an ordinary old woman. In old age, the same thoughts come to everyone anyway. She surely wanted to be remembered well by her granddaughter and left something, her apartment or savings, or maybe both. No, Mom, I don't understand now, Robert interrupted Patricia Ann. You want your son to give up the woman he loves so he can use his wife's inheritance? Do you think I'm some kind of gigolo? You're as stupid as a teenager, in my opinion, his mother-in-law replied angrily. One would think you suffered with Jane before meeting Sandra. You just lived your lives. And with good means, you'd live even better, less arguing with money. I don't know. And Sandra is hardly an ideal, so I don't see the point in trading one bad thing for another. Did you only live with my father for that reason too? Robert sneered. What do I and your father have to do with this? Jane flinched, hearing quick steps below. Several people were coming up the stairs, very close. They were walking fast and talking quite loudly. Robert and his mother couldn't fail to hear them and stopped their conversation. Jane decided to wait until these people were level with her. She crouched down and pretended that an untied shoelace had delayed her. 2 doctors and a nurse were coming up the stairs. Jane's shoelaces were immediately in perfect order, and she continued on her way right behind the medics. Well, that's a decision, her friend Rita exclaimed with bewildered admiration, having listened to Jane's story. If I hadn't heard it from you yourself, I wouldn't have believed you'd dare to leave like that. And you even had the patience to wait for almost a month. I would have lost it long ago. I would have given myself away. But you surprised me, Janet. I was sure I knew you as well as I knew myself, and you're revealing a completely unexpected side. I didn't expect it from myself either, Jane smiled sadly. I like to think I was a delicate young lady who couldn't stand making decisions herself. And what will you tell Leo? Delicate young lady, Rita thought. Already like this? That's why I waited a month, so Leo could go to sports camp for his session. His friend from class recently had his parents divorce, and his dad is already living with another woman. Leo told me himself. He's worried about his friend, but he understands that these things happen. Right, he's mature for his age, Rita agreed. So I thought, if I leave now, and Robert will surely be living with Sandra by then, I won't have to invent lies for my son. I'm already worn out from waiting for Robert to honestly say, now you're a well-off woman, it won't be so scary for you to be alone, and I can admit that I've fallen in love with someone else. But he apparently decided to follow his mother's advice after all. When he was arguing with her and playing the noble guy, he simply didn't know what kind of inheritance I had. Stop tormenting yourself, Rita tried to stop her friend. You dwell on this every day, pity yourself already. Rita, I pity myself, and I pity this Sandra. That's why I need a little more time to whine, and then I'll calm down, Jane assured her. Why pity Sandra? Her friend snorted. She's getting involved with a married man. She should be ready for all sorts of obstacles. I know my Robert, well, not mine anymore, perfectly well. He can convince anyone of his feelings if he sets his mind to it. I remember from my own experience, and Sandra was surely confident in him. But he traded her for his wife's inheritance, for the opportunity to live comfortably, to buy a new car, for example. He's already slowly starting to test the waters, asking if his beloved wife wants a brand new car instead of the old one. That's when I was closer than ever to giving myself away. I look at him and think, if the elevator in the hospital had been working then, I wouldn't have heard his conversation with his mother. I'd be living and rejoicing now, thinking how good everything is between us, what a close, loving family we are. And it's horrifying to think that I could have lived my whole life with this hypocrite, and even sometimes thought I was happy. Everything is always so complicated with you, Rita shook her head. You could have lived, you could have. If you found out everything, you're leaving yourself. You don't foresee any financial problems. That's it, live and be happy. Something tells me that the revelation of Robert's character struck you so much that you won't mourn him. Yes, I won't now, Jane agreed calmly. Unlike mine, Leo's inheritance is secure. Exactly, Rita raised her index finger to the sky. So you had no other option but divorce anyway, and this way, at least you leave first, with a sense of victory. Yes, I approve of your decision." To be honest, Jane's own idea seemed very simple, without much imagination. When Robert came home from work the next day, he froze at the doorway, not knowing how to react to what he saw. Firstly, this wasn't a case where a man might not notice his wife's new haircut. As long as he had known Jane, she had always had thick, dark blonde hair almost to her waist. Now half the length was cut off, and the unusually uneven strands, styled in a lush cascade, shimmered with a rich, fiery dark red colour. A surprised Robert admitted, without much pleasure, that such changes had turned his wife into a striking beauty. Moreover, she was wearing a green dress that resembled a long, loose tank top, and it also suited her very well, although it bore no resemblance to her previous clothes. It emphasized her figure too much. Standing in front of the wide-open wardrobe, Jane declared to her husband instead of a greeting, "Well, I've thrown out the better half of the unnecessary junk, and I can leave." "Leave for where?" Robert asked, suddenly starting to feel like some kind of duped idiot. "To Moscow, to see my apartments, both the main one and the studio that's rented out, and the dacha. Might as well do that at the same time. I'm thinking of renting it out for a month, or keeping it for myself altogether, maybe moving there as an option. Enrolling Leo in a Moscow gymnasium." "Are you going to decide that unilaterally?" Robert asked meaningfully about Leo. "No, of course not," Jane reassured him. "You are his full parent. That will always be the case. As for my property and bank deposit, of course that's my decision." "And they gave you vacation just like that?" Robert snorted disbelievingly, trying not to betray his complete confusion. "You're irreplaceable, you used to assure me." "Surprisingly, I asked for vacation and they gave it to me right away. Perhaps the management suspects I might quit now and are trying to keep me with kind treatment. Although I do increasingly think about quitting and moving." "And you didn't even think to share these thoughts with me, or at least warn me that you were going to Moscow?" "Perhaps only tomorrow, so you can consider yourself warned in advance." "And how long are you planning to stay there in your capitals? You were just there a month ago when the will was read. Are you going to commute like this every month?" "I don't know for sure yet. There are too many things to do, and I'm inexperienced in such matters. Eleanor's lawyers will advise me." "I see. Well, it had to be done sometime," Robert closed off. "Did you think to cook me something to eat, at least for 5 days?" "Robert, well, the freezer is full. Cook whatever you want." "Don't you think you're behaving badly?" Robert tried to go on the offensive. "I don't think so," Jane smiled amiably. "What, do you deliberately want to quarrel? This sudden change? You've adopted a new tone in conversation. Do you feel rich and independent?" "Don't envy me so obviously," Jane winked at her husband just as amiably. "I'm genuinely tired and don't want any quarrels or showdowns. I just want to calmly pack and leave on business." "Fine, leave. Just don't be surprised by what you see when you come back." "Excellent," Jane smiled carelessly. "Relax. Don't be such a bore." Robert fell silent, snorted harshly, and didn't say a word to his wife until night. He sat down at the computer to play his favourite strategy game, which she couldn't stand, considering it too aggressive. Jane paid no attention to anything, packing for half the night. In the morning, when Robert was still sleeping, nose buried in the pillow, he opened his eyes and saw Jane in front of him, skillfully made up, wearing a tank top and jeans. "Bye-bye, I'm off." She waved cheerfully in front of her husband's nose, grabbed her wheeled suitcase, and headed towards the front door with a dancing gait. Even the squeak of the key in the lock seemed mockingly cheerful to Robert. She was happy to be leaving and wasn't even trying to hide it. Had she managed to meet some old Moscow codger at that funeral? Did she think she was a femme fatale? And for the sake of putting up with these antics, he had been inventing excuses not to see Sandra for the past month? What an idiot he was. "Sandy, what are your plans for today?" Robert asked tenderly a couple of minutes later, sighing meekly into his mobile phone. Jane was seen off at the station by her mother and Rita. Without prior arrangement, they didn't rush to leave, watching the train for a long time, even after there was no noise or trace of it left on the horizon. "Maybe we should buy a pie, Rita," her mother suggested tentatively to her friend. "Or do you also think station pies are poison? In my day, they were called sick makers." "Oh, Aunt Eugenia," Rita confessed, "I love sick makers." Eating the pies wrapped in flimsy napkins, they talked about Jane. "I would never have thought our Janet was so brave," Rita continued her confessions. "You were much more spirited even at school." "I'm only more spirited on the outside, but actually just louder, like an empty drum," Rita laughed. "I'm scared to even think what I would do if I were in a situation like Jane's. I'd definitely throw a silly, loud tantrum, giving my husband a reason to be glad that such a hysterical woman was leaving him. After all, if a girl is hysterical, it means she's still hurt. I couldn't have played the carefree heiress who doesn't care about her husband like that. But Jane could." "Yes, but it was actually very hard for her, I know," Aunt Eugenia sighed. "My only hope is that a change of scenery will help her clear her head. She's been dreaming of travelling for a long time, but something always got in the way. Robert always had enough fishing trips and visits to friends' dachas. Leo is sent to sports camps, and my daughter kept putting off her own life. See how lucky it was that grandmother decided to leave everything to Jane," Rita picked up. "What if your Queen of Spades was a real witch and foresaw and knew everything?" "Eleanor could do that," Aunt Eugenia nodded with a smile. She had never felt aversion towards her mother-in-law, and now she even remembered this original personality with warmth. How did Eleanor manage it? She always did everything her own way, only considered herself. But no one was angry with her, and all her ex-husbands sent her New Year's greetings. "A witch, definitely a witch." Jane, funny to say, was travelling in a compartment carriage for the first time in her life. She handled journeys perfectly, was absolutely unpretentious, not demanding of comfort. She liked fellow travellers, as long as they weren't aggressive. But suddenly, out of sheer curiosity, she decided to travel to Moscow in a compartment. The price wasn't exorbitant. She wasn't going to stroll through expensive boutiques and social events in Moscow. She would really be busy with business, and in her free time she would wander through places she knew by description from her beloved Bulgakov. She definitely had to walk around Patriarch's Ponds someday. She also thought that day, when they met, it was interesting. If Dad had been alive, would Eleanor have left the inheritance to her son, not her granddaughter? You couldn't say anything for sure about her. None of Jane's acquaintances had or have such an unpredictable grandmother, that's a fact. It was vacation season, so the carriage was full. From the departure station, a very young couple in love and a silent man around 40 were travelling in her compartment with Jane. The couple was busy with each other and didn't stay put, while Jane was grateful to the man for being absorbed in his thoughts almost as much as she was, and for being able to be almost invisible. A funny ability for such a tall and lanky person. Such people should probably be noisy in a confined space, like a compartment. Jane glanced around a couple of times, as if to make sure he wasn't watching her, and continued thinking her own thoughts. The further she got from her city, the lighter her heart felt. Long journeys always calmed her down. It was interesting. Were there any gypsies in their family? She should ask her mother. "Are you being met?" the compartment neighbour politely inquired when there were about 15 minutes left to Moscow. "To help with luggage, for example? To a taxi?" "I barely have any luggage, just a light sports bag with summer clothes." Jane smiled carelessly. "I'm travelling on business, so I will be met. Yes, but thank you for the offer." Imagine, they had only exchanged a few words the whole journey, and the man was offering help. At first glance, Eugenia was indeed right. She left behind the house that Jane had recently considered her own. She settled into Eleanor's spacious apartment, which she had initially firmly intended to sell. Why such grand chambers if you could buy 2 cosy apartments for that money? But now she wanted to get rid of Eleanor's apartment less and less. There was a beautifully furnished classical kitchen dining room here. In old films, people sipped tea from Chinese porcelain in such dining rooms. By the way, suitable porcelain was also available, and there were living rooms with a piano and excellent reproductions of famous paintings, the mistress's bedroom resembling a boudoir, and a study combined with a library. On the way to Moscow, Jane thought she would feel uncomfortable, maybe even spooky, staying here alone, and yet she was still considering staying in a hotel upon arrival. To her own great surprise, Jane immediately felt at home in this apartment. She was even more astonished when she began to realize that she and Eleanor had quite a lot in common. Jane didn't want to change the curtains on the windows, nor the dishes, nor the paintings and photographs on the walls. Even the books in the library that she had managed to examine seemed to have been chosen with her taste in mind. Jane walked around the house, sat in armchairs, and mentally thanked Eleanor. A nice studio with modern renovations, also part of Jane's inheritance, was rented by a young married couple, pleasant people who spent most of the day at work. Jane gladly assured them that she had no intention of selling the property, raising the rent, or looking for new tenants, and went to the dacha. Jane herself, and her parents too, had never had any dachas, and no one complained that they lacked one. Jane's father, Maxwell, used to say that in a small green city surrounded by forests and lakes, it was silly to stay in one place when you could discover new corners of nature every weekend, and that's what they did as a family. But Eleanor had a dacha, and, as Rita had correctly guessed, there was no talk of vegetable patches there. A vegetable garden and Eleanor, that was even ridiculous to imagine. Eleanor's dacha resembled a refuge from the hustle and bustle of the world. Deep within an old apple orchard, overgrown with tall grass, stood a not too well-maintained but solid 2-story country house, old-fashioned, resembling a small estate. From the inside, it turned out to be much cosier than from the outside, and it amazed with its cleanliness and tidiness. The lawyer accompanying Jane, Bernard Bernard, even apologized quietly, noticing her surprise. "Did I forget to mention that Eleanor's housekeeper, Stanislavovna, lives in the house? Former now. Forgive me. Here she is coming out to meet us." "Good afternoon," Jane said, somewhat embarrassed for some reason, as soon as she saw the woman coming down the stairs towards them. "Hello," she replied with a friendly, warm smile. "My name is Olga Peterson. Did you have a good journey? Perhaps some tea, coffee, or something stronger?" "Jane," a flustered Jane introduced herself. "Excuse the intrusion. I thought no one lived here anymore. And what about you?" Jane didn't know how to phrase the question that immediately came to her mind in a way that wouldn't offend the woman, and she fell silent, choosing her words. "Don't worry," Olga Peterson assured her, understanding everything at once, almost cheerfully. "Everything is fine. I'll tell you and explain everything now. Let's go to the dining room." And she went ahead, leading Jane and Bernard with her. Olga Peterson was immediately likable. A lively lady in her 60s, sturdy and fit, radiating friendliness and warmth. "Which of you is driving?" she winked, immediately opening a carved wooden box. "I can treat the passenger to my signature cranberry liqueur. Eleanor really appreciated it." "I'm the eternal passenger," Jane smiled. "I don't drive. Treat me." "I call Stanislavovna Eleanor. I got used to it over many years. If it's unpleasant for you, I can use the proper address." "No, call her what you're used to," Jane hastened to reassure her. "Excuse me, I really didn't know you were staying here after grandmother's death. No one told me anything. Who is paying you? You maintain such exemplary order. How much do I owe you?" "Oh," Olga Peterson laughed, touched. "And what about me not paying anything for living here and breathing in the chambers, the fresh apple orchard? Didn't you think that you could have even asked me for payment for that? Actually, Eleanor also left me a little money, and it's a significant amount for me." "Was there something about Olga Peterson in the will? That's me. Don't you remember who got what anymore?" "I wasn't paying attention," Jane admitted. "Now that's a generous girl, a real aristocrat," Olga Peterson praised her. "Anyway, and seriously, I really live here like in a sanatorium. There are shops nearby with the essentials, 2 of them, and what they don't have, the neighbours from the city bring me. The neighbours are good, sociable and quiet, they don't meddle in anything, and our plots aren't cramped, as you can see. Just tell me, Janie, by what date I should vacate the house and when it's convenient for you to show and tell me everything. I can do it right now, but it's up to you to decide." "And where will you go if—" Jane didn't finish. "Well, I'm not the court of Madrid to have such secrets," Olga Peterson assured her, almost cheerfully. "I'll go to my daughter's place in Vladimir. There's room, my son-in-law is good, I won't be a surprise to them. I would have returned there in my old age anyway. Everyone knew that. Of course, if Eleanor had lived longer in this world, I would have worked for her for another 10 years. Although Olga Peterson was both discerning and talkative, Jane understood that the woman didn't want to leave this house. "I would gladly give you that opportunity," Jane confessed. "But I'm not the type of person who needs to hire household staff. I can even do repairs myself. I had to learn. Specialists charge a lot. Please forgive me." "What apologies, my dear girl." Olga Peterson became emotional again. "But I would advise you not to decide what to do with all the property right away. Think about it a little. Another month or 2 will pass. The initial flustered passions will subside, and everything will fall into place in your head." "I completely agree," Bernard's approving voice chimed in. "When there's no urgent need for money, that's the way to go." "That's what I'll do. Thank you all," Jane decided cheerfully. "And let's walk around the house then. Will there be apples there too?" "Plenty," Olga Peterson assured her. "I do take care of the trees." Bernard asked permission to stay in the garden in an old rattan armchair, smoke, and make a couple of business calls, while Olga Peterson began showing Jane her new possessions like a seasoned estate guide. "I don't know what I'll sell now," Jane said, half jokingly, half seriously. "I like grandmother's apartment, and I like this house too. And for the money the tenants pay for the studio, I work a month in my city." "That's what I'm saying. You have something to think about." Olga Peterson waved her hand. "And what if, while you're thinking, I find tenants for this house? How do you feel about that? Do you agree?" It suddenly occurred to Jane. "You're the owner. It's up to you to decide." Olga Peterson didn't immediately grasp. "You didn't even ask me." "No, you didn't understand," Jane explained. "If I ask you to stay here, look after the house, and keep it clean for the tenants, would that suit you? They'll pay me rent, I'll pay you a salary from that money, and the house won't be neglected while I'm sorting out my affairs and problems. My father used to say that a private house shouldn't be left without people. It deteriorates and falls apart faster that way. Your father is right, Olga Peterson declared, pleased to find a like-minded person. Houses aren't like apartments in an anthill, a human anthill. They are like that. They have their own soul. And I won't be coy. Such an offer would suit me very well. Only you understand, Janie, there's a delicate point here. I'm also a living person. I have to like your tenants. And they shouldn't dislike me either. For the position of housekeeper, that's an important point. In an office, you can ignore everyone and just earn money. But here, it's close proximity, living under the same roof. I wouldn't even think of moving someone in who you dislike, Jane said, surprised. I'll send everyone here so you can look at each other and decide if it's right for all of you or not. Agree that you've already seriously decided to rent out the house? Olga Peterson was taken aback. Why, is it a bad decision? I have to put something in order on this visit. Otherwise, it'll turn out I just went for a trip to get away. And sometimes that's necessary too, her interlocutor said with conviction. To rest from work, from household chores. Forgive the immodest question. Do you have a family? I have a son, I have a mother, I also have a husband. For now he thinks he exists, but for me he's almost former. Oh, I see, Olga Peterson commented cautiously, looking at Jane sympathetically, but didn't dare to ask further. Jane herself suddenly wanted to tell this woman everything in brief. A simple affair. He met someone else, wanted to leave the family. I accidentally overheard my Robert himself telling his mother that he chose to live with the woman he loved, and his mother-in-law was persuading him to wait in case I got a good inheritance. Her son is selling out. He even got indignant about what kind of honest guy his mother thought he was, what kind of honest guy I was married to. Is that what you thought? Olga Peterson asked again. Yeah, Jane confirmed. But it turned out I was wrong. Maybe the guy couldn't handle the scale of my inheritance. Neither I nor he nor anyone in our families were ever particularly wealthy. He became an attentive family man, straight home after work, weekends only with family. He decided to give up his love. I see him wandering around sadly, but he's holding on. Good for him. We could use a new car, he says. There. Gigolo! Olga Peterson shook her head, so artistically that Jane couldn't help but smile. And you decided not to put up with this scoundrel? Yeah, I decided to free him from forced lying. He could have ended up hating me so much in a few years that he'd poison me, like in old English detectives, Jane snorted. And you're a good girl, Olga simply approved. I would have done that. Have you completely parted ways with him, or just left for now to think things over? Just left for now. I just presented him with the fact in the evening that I would leave in the morning. I wanted to see his reaction. I was curious. I saw it. Now I'm even more certain of my decision. I'll return when my son comes back from sports camp and announce to Robert that I've found someone else here. Let him prepare for a divorce. And there isn't one yet, of course? Jane laughed, surprised. Why, of course, her interlocutor chuckled. Such a charming girl is unlikely to remain unnoticed for even a day. And I'm not flattering you. Female laughter. Bernard emerged from behind a shaggy currant bush. Jane Maxwell, forgive me for interrupting your pleasant company, but I'm being met at the station. If we can leave for the city in about half an hour, we'll have time to discuss everything on the way, talk about our further actions. I'll take you directly to your house. All right, Bernard, Jane assured him. I've already decided everything. We can go right now. Or would you like to stay here? Olga Peterson suggested. No plans for the evening. There's fresh bedding. The guest bedroom is in perfect order, like in a luxury hotel. And in the morning, after you've slept well, you can calmly return to the city. How does my plan sound? Well, it's a good plan, Jane approved. I would have been too shy to invite myself, but I'm happy for the invitation. I've become quite brazen with you. You're at your own home, Olga Peterson reminded her, tapping her forehead. And both women said almost in unison, Go ahead, Bernard. A very, very long time ago, probably in childhood, Jane had slept as soundly as she did that night on the veranda of her house near Moscow. Olga Peterson offered her a bed in any room she chose, particularly urging her to take the beautiful guest room, which indeed resembled a cosy room in a country hotel, but Jane chose the veranda. It's cooler here and the windows are huge. I'll be able to see the stars, she explained. Jane didn't even get a chance to admire the stars. She fell asleep quickly after a long and pleasant day. And the next morning, having returned to the city, she sat down to compose an advertisement on a real estate website for renting out the country house with the services of the live-in housekeeper and a large plot occupied by a picturesque garden. She paused, thinking how best to formulate the preference for tenants, and suddenly flinched at the phone call. It was Robert calling. Completely abandoned the family? He asked immediately instead of a greeting. Hi, Jane replied with friendly indifference. Why abandoned? I call Leo at camp every day, morning and evening, and send pictures from Moscow and messages. He's doing great, but you probably know that yourself. You talk to him too, don't you? And you have nothing left to say to me? And you to me? Jane smiled into the phone. I've been busy with things all these days, sorted some things out, decided some things already. But you know what? I'll tell you about it at home, I think. I won't linger here. I'll come back earlier if there are tickets for tomorrow. I'll take one for tomorrow. No need to drag it out. So everything's all right? Robert asked, deciding to restrain his irritation. Completely, Jane confirmed. And indeed, she immediately bought a train ticket, not for tomorrow, but for the day after tomorrow. She informed Bernard about the train. He assured her that she could leave with a light heart. Her personal presence in Moscow wasn't needed for now. However, was she sure she could fully trust someone in a matter like choosing tenants for the dacha? I plan to return soon, Jane explained. Maybe even for good. That's why I have to leave urgently now. Yes, it's better not to accumulate loose ends, Bernard understood and approved immediately. And are you sure people willing to rent such a large, expensive dacha can be found so quickly? She inquired. Usually not, but sometimes it happens. Well, as a last resort in the modern world, there are video calls. If someone needs to move in urgently, you can at least get some idea of the people that way. And I'll help you with my experienced eye too, give you my assessment, and I'll quickly draw up a contract if needed. It's standard. I'll also consult with Olga Peterson if anything, Jane added. That's a sound idea too. Women in her profession often make accurate assessments of people. A good housekeeper isn't just about sweeping, as some snobs think. Jane had nothing to add to that remark. She had never had to be either a housekeeper or a snob. She called a taxi and went to say goodbye to Olga Peterson. She still needed to agree on how they would choose tenants, as Jane didn't like sharing her thoughts much over the phone, preferring to do so in person. Janie, don't worry, Olga Peterson assured her. If we really find decent people and ones willing to pay such a price, I won't let them get away just like that. I'll convince them they won't find a better option. I can also sit with and tutor children well, though I get tired of wild ones. And I'm not a bad cook, of course, if people aren't used to exquisite cuisine. I might not make artichokes with anchovies every day, like in the best houses in Paris, but my pies and borscht are excellent. I won't be modest. I realized you were a treasure right away, Jane laughed. No, the treasure here is you, Olga Peterson objected warmly, as if someone were about to argue with her. You are offering me to continue working for the same salary Eleanor paid me in the environment I'm used to. Otherwise, I would have had to lead a completely retirement life, and I don't want to spend the money Eleanor left me on myself. I'd rather help my daughter's family, and I can still earn some more for myself. I go on vacation to the sea during the velvet season every year. I'd be sad without the sea. So thank you, Janie, and I'll try to live up to your trust. Why do you look so tired? I'm not tired. I'm just afraid of returning home, Jane confessed. I've decided everything, and now I'm scared. I'm used to not arguing with anyone, not getting involved in adventures. And now I'm pretending to be a fiery redhead, a decisive heiress, but I'm just an ordinary provincial coward. You're such a storyteller, Olga Peterson exclaimed admiringly. With your idea of telling your husband, you're just like Eleanor. She also loved to invent things about herself, and everyone believed her, and everything worked out beautifully. So I'll be waiting for you here with your son and mother, and holding on to decent tenants so they don't get off the hook. Jane decided to inform Robert of her arrival time. It wasn't in her plans to meet Sandra, who could very well be in the apartment with Robert. Should I meet you at the station? Robert asked. No need. I don't have heavy luggage. I'll get there myself. Thank you for your concern. There were notes of sarcasm in Robert's voice, but now they only brought a smile to Jane's face. On the morning before leaving, she called her mother and warned her that she would be staying with her that night and would live with her until she moved into Eleanor's apartment. Are you absolutely sure? Her mother breathed out. What if Leo doesn't want to? Mom, let's talk at home. The apartment that Jane had so recently considered her home greeted her with dirty floors and a pyramid of dirty dishes in the kitchen sink. A couple of fat flies circled above the pyramid, eagerly looking for something to feast on, while another pair crawled across a frying pan with leftover fried potatoes. Hi, it's cozy here, Jane announced without a hint of hysteria, almost cheerfully. Hi, her husband replied from behind the computer. Did my best after work without a wife. She shrugged. If you like it, it's your business. Jane replied amicably. And you're not the mistress here anymore? And suddenly, as if understanding something from his wife's gaze, Robert's tone changed abruptly. All right, Eugenie, we've had our fun. The boss has exhausted everyone. I'm seriously thinking of quitting with this kind of attitude. As I understand it, we're not struggling financially now. There's time to find a decent job. I understand everything, Robert. I'm exactly the same. If it weren't for this unexpectedly fallen inheritance, I wouldn't have dared to leave a job I didn't like. After all, stability can be much worse than people usually try to convince themselves it is. Now I'll take a shower, change, and go quit. Your vacation just started. You could have gone somewhere, Robert reminded her, puzzled, clearly not understanding what she was getting at. I'm not a snake in the grass, Jane explained. My boss hasn't done anything bad to me for me to pull such a trick on him. By the time my vacation officially ends, he might find someone else for my position. But everyday matters can wait, Janie. If you're talking about the mess in the house, yes, I admit I'm to blame. You've never been a bore and never made a fuss over trifles, and I'm not going to change now, Jane confirmed. Anyway, there's no point in preparing for such announcements for a long time. It's better to be immediate and honest. We need to get a divorce, Robert. Her husband got out of the computer chair with an unexpected clatter. So that's a condition of the will, is it? He asked with a smirk, hiding his irritation. Robert, I wouldn't joke about this if you know me even a little. I've met another man and I don't want to live a double life. And carefree heiresses like toy boys, her husband sneered dismissively, putting on a sickly sweet smile. What other boys? Ignoring the sarcasm, Jane continued, and Madame now moves in circles where it's improper to have husbands like me. Only those with status are valued. Robert, I'm not insulting you, and I hope for understanding. I've simply met someone else. The same thing could have happened to you. I'm not claiming anything at all. I'll only take mine and Leo's things, clothes, and toys. Robert shook off his pose of a mocking macho and stared at his composed wife, suddenly realizing in an instant that she wasn't joking. He breathed out his last vengeful card. You won't get anything from me for the child. It was already past midnight. Discussing her announcements of divorce and resignation with Rita and her mother, when Jane smiled sadly. I never thought it would be harder for me to upset my boss than my own husband. I thought the hardest question would be about my son, but Robert only remembered Leo in connection with money when he said he wouldn't give anything for him. Well, he'll have to pay alimony by law anyway, Rita sighed mockingly. Don't be silly. You know perfectly well I'm not talking about that. Jane waved her off. If it weren't for this inheritance, I would never have known what kind of person I lived with for 12 years. That's what scares me. Generally, in what kind of relationships. Oh, girls. Her mother, acting as an arbiter, took both their hands. Then none of us should get involved in anything. When we love, we all want to believe in the best. And we do believe. Otherwise, life on the planet would have died out long ago. Janet, Aunt Eugenia, let's just have one moment without complex philosophy, Rita smiled forgivingly. You're lucky, Janie, that you not only learned Robert's true nature, but also left him yourself, without damage to your self-esteem. He has only one consolation left now, to invent a beautiful legend for Sandra that he left you for love. I truly don't care about that, Jane waved it off. It feels like a mountain has been lifted off my shoulders. I promised my boss I'd stay for a maximum of a week before quitting. He wants me to hand over my duties to a new employee. It seems he already has someone in mind. I agreed. A week is not a year. And I'll go back to Moscow to look for tenants for the Dasha and a good school for Leo. I still need to figure out how to prepare him, what to say. I'll help, her mother assured her. I'll think of something too, Rita promised. As Jane somehow foresaw, there weren't many people interested in renting such a large house. For the summer, people are content with a small house in a gardening association, Olga Peterson said understandingly. And not everyone is ready to live outside the city in winter. If it weren't for my salary, you could lower the price, and tenants would be found immediately. I feel like I should start packing for Vladimir. Janie, if you miss your daughter and want to leave, just say so. Olga Peterson, Jane asked. I told you honestly right away I would have worked for another 10 years. Olga Peterson abruptly changed course again. But so far, we haven't found a single lady willing to pay extra for a house with a housekeeper. Let's wait a little longer. Not much time has passed. It's too early to draw conclusions. And Olga Peterson meekly agreed to wait. Jane stayed sometimes at her place outside the city, sometimes in the city apartment, walked around the city, filmed videos for Leo, whom his grandmother was supposed to bring to Moscow soon as his camp session ended. Leo was sad that his dad had almost stopped calling. A week after Jane left, Patricia Ann called with the intention of expressing everything she thought about their immoral family. It turned out that Eugenia had once married a spoiled rich kid from the capital, hoping for a beautiful life, but miscalculated. But her daughter decided to make up for both of them. No sooner had she received her granny's inheritance than she heartlessly threw out her undistinguished but honest and decent husband and the father of her child. Status didn't even stop her from doing that. Jane's mother's voice, although understanding, was tired. and Jane, immediately after talking to her mother, dialed her mother-in-law's number. "Patricia Ann, if you are overwhelmed with feelings, express them to me, not my mother. She has absolutely nothing to do with this story, and even better, shift your attention to your son." A strange silence from her mother-in-law followed, and suddenly a silly childish prank came to Jane's mind, and she added after the prolonged pause, "Do you really think I don't have the means for a private investigation? That's regarding your son's honesty and decency." Patricia Ann said goodbye in confusion. "At least now she definitely won't bother Mum," Jane justified her invention. "We have a long-term tenant showing up," she announced in a lively voice. "He couldn't reach you, your line was busy. So he called me. He asked when he could come and see the house. He asked relevant questions, wasn't scared by the price, and was polite. I remembered you were coming to me for lunch tomorrow and risked setting the time myself for 2 hours before lunch. Did I do the right thing, or should you call him back and change the time?" "We won't change anything. You did great. I'll come earlier," Jane promised. Lately, so many events had happened in her once unhurried life in such a short time that Jane wasn't at all surprised by the new little surprise. When the man who wanted to rent Eleanor's picturesque dacha got out of the car, Jane recognized him as her fellow traveller, the silent compartment neighbour who had offered her help with her luggage when she was travelling to Moscow after the memorable conversation she had overheard in the hospital. Her fellow traveller also recognised Jane immediately, smiled in surprise, and instantly became flustered. "I remember you," he said just in case, as if Jane might not have noticed. "My name is Glenn. I need a house." "Everyone needs a house," Jane smiled. "How many people are you?" "There's one of me," Glenn replied. "I already understood from the description on the website that here—" Glenn explained that he was an architect and landscape designer, had his own bureau, had been working remotely with Moscow for a long time, visited often, and had even managed to buy an apartment here. Only it had been empty all these years. His mother absolutely refused to move to Moscow, so he stayed with her. She wasn't the kind of person to live alone after her father's death. And he didn't need it. He was mobile. He used to come to the capital on business trips, get things done, and go back. And recently, she passed away. He decided to move here permanently. And suddenly he realized that he wasn't an apartment person. He wanted to live in a house outside the city. He bought a plot and is building a small house there with a pond, according to his own design. And while it's being built, he decided to rent accommodation. Olga Peterson immediately and unconditionally liked Glenn, and she invited him to lunch in no uncertain terms. "Jane and I are actually planning to have lunch here, and we don't intend to starve and wait for you to leave. So welcome to the table." "I can't refuse such an honest and heartfelt invitation," Glenn said, delighted. "It's such happiness, a house with its own Mrs. Hudson." After lunch, having managed to agree on the time for signing the contract, Jane walked the tenant to the gate and couldn't resist remarking, "On the train, you seemed like a very silent person, but now it turns out to be the opposite." "Yes, I'm a chatterbox," Glenn admitted with a smile, when not at work. "And you seemed very focused on the train then, immersed in serious problems, so I didn't bother you with conversation, although I really wanted to get acquainted." "Well, you are perceptive. You're a dangerous person." Jane also couldn't help but smile. "Now is a much better time. Back then, I really wasn't up for anything or anyone." A year later, visiting her daughter and grandson in Moscow, Eugenia, chuckling good-naturedly, told Jane simple news about mutual acquaintances. I don't know from whom, but Patricia Ann heard that you were really going to marry a gentleman from the capital, that I was invited to the wedding, and then she just exploded. Is she calling you again? No, she doesn't call me. She crosses the street when she sees me. My friend Ira, it turns out, works with her new daughter-in-law, Sandra. She says Sandra looks sad now. Her mother-in-law told her to her face that she ruined her son's whole life, that he could be living in a huge apartment or a mansion of his choice in Moscow now, and because of Sandra, the family destroyer, he is now forced to languish his whole life. In short, Patricia said a lot of nonsense in her usual style. Everyone feels sorry for Sandra now, of course, except for those who are gloating that she shouldn't have gotten involved with a married man. I'm on the sympathetic side, Jane announced. If it weren't for Sandra, I wouldn't have met Glenn.